The sound of shattering glass cut through the dinner like a gunshot. The brightly lit kitchen fell silent. Eleanor froze shards glittering at her feet while her only son, Jason, cleared the dishes as if ending a business meeting rather than a family meal. No one in the old wooden house by the Savannah River knew that within minutes, everything they called family would splinter into pieces. Lila, her 14-year-old granddaughter, sat still at the worn wooden table, her wide eyes darting between her father and grandmother, the scent of cooling food mixed with the salty air drifting in from the river. Jason sighed, his expression cold as steel. "I need freedom, Mom. I'm tired of this house, of your moral lectures, of my daughter's judgmental stares." His voice was dry as sand. Eleanor set her chopsticks down her hand, trembling slightly. She tried to keep her tone calm, though a storm was rising inside her. "Freedom from what, Jason? You have a job, a home, a good daughter, and a mother who cooks for you. What more could you possibly need?" "Money," he replied flatly, eyes unblinking. "You've lived your whole life in an illusion. Your teacher's salary can't sustain anyone. I have to save myself. I've met someone who understands me." Eleanor stared at her son, recognizing something dangerous in his voice, that blind gleam of conviction. "Someone who's Sabrina. She's teaching me how to invest, how to make real money." He gave a thin smile, the kind that reminded her of students caught cheating on an exam. "She understands the value of risk, unlike you." She stood the chair legs scraping sharply against the tile. "Risk you? Call gambling with the family's savings a risk." Jason threw his napkin onto the table. "You don't get it. I withdrew the funds from your retirement account and moved them all into crypto investments. It's an opportunity, not a crime." The room turned cold. Lila stopped breathing. Eleanor felt the world slip from her grasp. "What did you say?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Jason looked her straight in the eye, unmoved. "Your money, and Lila's too. You were never going to use it, and I need it to start my business. Sabrina has a plan. She's a genius." Eleanor staggered, gripping the edge of the table for balance. For a moment, she felt like a stranger in her own home. He had really done it, taken everything, without asking, without shame. "Jason, are you talking to your mother or to a stranger?" she asked, trembling. "I'm just telling the truth," he said smoothly, as if rehearsed. "You've spent your life in a world of books, morals, and poverty. I need to break free. You and Lila will be fine. You've got this house, your pension. I'll pay you back when the profits come." "Pay back." She let out a short, broken laugh that caught in her throat. "You've stolen trust, my son. How do you repay that?" Jason avoided her gaze, picking up the suitcase, waiting by his chair. "You always wanted to be the good person, Mom, but good people don't win. I intend to win." She wanted to stop him, but her body wouldn't move. The door opened and damp river air rushed in, carrying the scent of salt and bitterness. Jason's car engine started, its red taillights fading into the night. In the silence that followed, only her heartbeat and the ticking clock filled the air like tiny needles. Lila still sat, frozen fists gripping her shirt. When the car's lights disappeared completely, she lifted her head. Her eyes weren't tearful as Eleanor expected. Instead, they were steady and sharp. "Grandma, I think I know what's happening." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked weakly. "Dad didn't just take the money. He's being conned. I've heard that woman's name, Sabrina, before. Remember the crypto queen case that's been all over the internet? I think it's the same person." Eleanor struggled to process her granddaughter's words. Her mind tangled in confusion. "Lila, you're 14. You're—" "Stay out of this." "No, Grandma," the girl said firmly, standing tall. "I can help, I've been studying transaction tracking and cybersecurity. Dad thinks I only do homework, but I know how to trace crypto wallets. I can find him and that woman too. Eleanor stared at her astonished. In the darkness, Lila's eyes glowed like small beacons in the storm. And in that moment, despite her heartbreak, Eleanor realized she wasn't broken, because beside her stood a child who wasn't afraid. She exhaled slowly, resting her hand over Lila's. "You really think you can do this?" "I don't think," Lila said quietly, but with unshakable conviction. "I know." There was power in her voice, soft yet resolute. Eleanor saw herself reflected in the girl, the younger version of the woman who had once rebuilt her life after her husband's death. The same courage, the same blood. The wind from the river roared, whipping the curtains like waves. Eleanor looked into the darkness where her son's car had vanished and whispered a vow carried by the breeze. "If he's chosen betrayal, then I'll choose justice." In the old kitchen, the antique clock struck 12. She rose and began sweeping the broken glass, each small clink sounding like the start of something new. Upstairs, Lila's light came on and the rhythmic tapping of keys echoed through the house, steady and determined like a battle drum, announcing the beginning of war. Eleanor looked up, her eyes softening. She knew that from this moment on, this story was no longer about loss. It was about two women, one old and one young, ready to teach the man who underestimated them a lesson he would never forget. That night, Savannah was soaked in humidity, and the wind from the river slipped through the cracks of the old house, carrying the scent of salt and ash. Eleanor tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The sound of typing from the room upstairs continued steadily, like another heartbeat pulsing through the house. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, she put on a cardigan and climbed the stairs barefoot. The door to Lila's room was slightly open. The blue glow from the laptop screen lit up her granddaughter's face, making her look far older than her 14 years. Lila sat in the middle of a maze of papers, printed emails, bank statements, and strange strings of numbers. Eleanor stood in the doorway, seeing pages filled with symbols she couldn't make sense of. "You're still awake?" Her voice rasped with worry. Lila looked up, her eyes bright but weary. "Almost done, Grandma. I have to check all the transaction history. There are too many traces." Eleanor stepped inside, sat on the edge of the bed, and watched the girl with a mix of awe and disbelief. This wasn't the same child who used to draw cats and read comic books. She looked like a young soldier in a digital battlefield. "What are you doing, Lila?" "I'm tracing Dad's trail," she replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "He didn't cover his tracks well enough. Every crypto wallet transaction leaves a record, and here it is." The screen lit up, showing a long string of characters and a web of transfers. This is the intermediary wallet. It's linked to an account under the name Sabrina Vale. Eleanor didn't understand much about technology, but her instincts told her this was evidence. "Are you sure it's really her 100% sure?" I cross-checked her photo. She's the crypto queen, the one under investigation for financial fraud. But more importantly, Grandma Dad wasn't just tricked by her. He was part of it. They transferred all your retirement savings and my college fund into a fake investment scheme. They even used your identity to take out 3 loans. Eleanor froze, a wave of numbness spreading through her chest. "Dear God," she whispered. "So my son didn't just leave, he turned his mother into a debtor." Lila nodded. "But I can fix it. I'll make them pay." Her voice was colder than the wind howling outside. Eleanor looked at her, torn between pride and fear. "Lila, you're 14. What you're doing could be illegal." The girl turned to her, eyes unwavering. "Grandma, he broke the law. She broke the law. I'm just taking back what's ours." Eleanor fell silent. Inside, her fear battled with belief. At last, she spoke softly. If you're going to do this, you have to be careful. Don't leave any trace, and promise me if it gets too dangerous, you'll stop." Lila smiled a smile far too mature for her age. "I promise." The next morning, pale sunlight streamed through the window, falling across the thick pile of papers. Eleanor brewed tea, pretending everything was normal, while Lila ate breakfast with her eyes still fixed on her tablet. "Grandma, I found something else," she said between bites. "Dad's account received money from at least 5 other people. They're probably more of Sabrina's victims. They think they're investing for profit, but really they're just sending money into her fake wallets." Eleanor set her teacup down so hard that tea splashed out. "So she's not just scamming us. No, she's a professional con artist. But Grandma, I already sent an anonymous report to the Financial Crimes Bureau. They didn't have technical proof. I can give them what they need." Eleanor froze. "You sent it?" "Yes, I used encrypted networks. No one can trace it. I only shared the transaction paths, not our identities. Where did you learn all this?" Lila shrugged. "Online. I've been studying cybersecurity for a year. I want to work in digital forensics someday." In that instant, Eleanor realized that while her son had drowned in delusion, her granddaughter had learned how the real world worked better than anyone. She stepped closer and placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, but don't let justice turn into revenge." Lila looked up her tone, calm and firm. "I'm not seeking revenge, Grandma. I just want them to face the consequences." That afternoon, they went to the bank. Eleanor wanted to verify her account. The employee frowned at the screen. "Mrs. Brooks, your retirement balance is $17. The words hit like a blade. Eleanor bit her lip until she tasted blood. She had spent her entire life saving every penny from her modest teacher's salary, counting every coin for Lila's future, and now it was all gone. On the drive home, she said nothing. The wind from the window tangled her silver hair. In the rearview mirror, she saw Lila's face, calm but unreadable, her eyes deep and calculating. The girl was thinking about something far beyond her grandmother's comprehension. That evening, Eleanor saw Lila printing dozens of pages. "What are you doing preparing evidence? Tomorrow I'll send more to the banking regulators. And I just locked all of Dad's accounts." Locked, yes. "I filed a temporary freeze request for illegal transactions. They're verifying it now. Once the investigation starts, Sabrina won't be able to withdraw anything. It's the first step." Eleanor sighed. "My little girl, you're running the world from your keyboard." "No," Grandma Lila said softly, her gaze distant. "I'm just trying to preserve the little bit of justice Dad forgot." Night fell again and rain drummed steadily on the roof. Eleanor sat in the living room staring at an old photograph of the 3 of them, Jason at 10, smiling brightly, holding her hand and his little sisters. She remembered the day her husband died, how Jason had promised, "I'll protect you, Mom. I'll take care of the family." She had believed him right up until now, and that belief made the pain unbearable. The door to Lila's room creaked open. The girl came downstairs holding a sheet of paper. "Grandma, I think you should see this." On it was a printed email from Jason's account. "Transfer all remaining funds to your secondary wallet. Tomorrow night, we leave the U.S. There's a place waiting in Belize." Beneath it was Sabrina Vale's signature. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read. Every letter cut into her heart like a blade. "They're really going to run?" "Yes. But not anymore. I've already sent an alert to their exchange platform. Their accounts will be flagged within 24 hours. Eleanor lifted her gaze, locking eyes with her granddaughter. "Lila, do you know what you're doing?" "I do," she said, steady as stone. "I'm taking our life back one line of code at a time." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain hammered the roof, each drop heavy as their shared heartbeat. Eleanor knew no one would sleep tonight. She quietly stood, drawing the curtains closed. Then do it, my girl. If justice begins with our own hands, then let me stand beside you. Through the sound of rain, Lila's lamp burned bright again. The light reflected on Eleanor's face, sharpening every line carved by years of endurance. Savannah's night was stirring, and in that small house by the river, the counterattack of 2 generations had begun. The next morning, the Savannah River was covered in mist. The first sunlight filtered through the branches of the old trees, spilling across the small window, where Lila still sat, her eyes fixed on the screen. Eleanor brewed coffee, the bitter aroma filling the kitchen. She set the cup down in front of her granddaughter and asked softly, "You stayed up all night, didn't you?" Lila nodded. "I had to track the flow of money. Dad and that woman are trying to erase the trail, but it's too late." Eleanor looked at the screen. Strange lines of code and graphs pulsed up and down like the heartbeat of someone on the verge of collapse. "You said their accounts are blocked now, right?" "Yes. The exchange has frozen their wallets due to suspected money laundering, but that's just the surface. I need to prove that Sabrina didn't just scam Dad, she scammed dozens of others too." Eleanor frowned. "And how do you plan to do that?" Lila took a deep breath. "I found a hidden data vault in her cloud storage. The file's name is Client List. I've decrypted half of it. They're all real people, teachers, nurses, the elderly, all sending money to her." Eleanor stayed silent, a lump rising in her throat. "They're just like us." "Yes," Lila said quietly, "and they deserve to get back what they lost." Inside Eleanor, something stirred a mix of anger, compassion, and a strength she thought had long disappeared. She had been a teacher once she knew what it meant to stand before the powerless and teach them how to find their voice. Perhaps now she was about to do that again, not in a classroom, but in a real battle. At noon, while Lila kept working, Eleanor went to the old market to buy some groceries. She passed a small cafe where people were talking loudly. Someone had opened a laptop, and on the screen was a news report, "Crypto Fraud Scandal Expands Across Coastal Georgia." The image of a young woman with a confident smile appeared beside the caption, "Sabrina Vale Controversial Tech Investor." Eleanor glanced at it, her heart tightening. That name had become her family's nightmare. When she returned home, Lila stood by the door holding her phone, her face tense. "Grandma, I just got a strange email. Someone's trying to trace my IP address." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "They found you?" "Probably Sabrina or someone from her group. I blocked it, but I need to move the data now." The girl rushed back to her room, fingers flying over the keyboard. Lines of code streamed across the screen like rain. "I'm transferring all the evidence to an anonymous server in Iceland. They'll never track it." Eleanor stood behind her, not fully understanding, but feeling every word like a blade. "You're doing something very dangerous, Lila." "I know," the girl said, her voice steady, "but if I don't, no one will ever know the truth. And you'll never be cleared." Eleanor gently touched her shoulder. "Clearing my name doesn't matter. What matters is that you're safe." Lila gave a faint, tired smile. "Don't worry, Grandma. They may be adults, but they're not smarter than me." The afternoon passed in silence. Neither of them spoke much, only the sound of wind and keystrokes filled the air. As dusk settled, Lila looked up, her eyes red and weary. "It's done! I have all the proof. Sabrina didn't just steal your money, she created at least 6 fake accounts. Dad was the one who approved the transactions." Eleanor felt the house tilt. "What did you say?" "Your father knew. He knew everything. He helped her set up the fake wallets and forged client records. Together, they stole nearly $400,000 from innocent people." Eleanor collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. My son God, how did I raise him into someone like this? Lila went quiet, then spoke softly. It's not your fault. He made his choice. But now we have to make ours the path of justice. Later that night, Eleanor opened an old wooden box filled with her late husband's keepsakes. She pulled out a letter he had written to Jason long ago, a message about honesty and responsibility. Her tears fell on the faded ink. If your father were alive, he wouldn't recognize the man his son has become, she whispered. Lila came closer, resting a hand on her grandmother's shoulder. But he'd be proud of you, Grandma, because you're still standing. In that moment, Eleanor realized that justice wasn't only about making the guilty pay. It was also about keeping hope alive for those who had almost lost it. The next morning, Lila prepared to upload the evidence to the financial crimes report system. Eleanor stood beside her holding the letter she had just written. To the Georgia Financial Crimes Bureau, it began. My name is Eleanor Brooks, the account holder whose funds were stolen. I am ready to tell the whole truth. Lila read it and nodded. It's perfect, Grandma. Your words are stronger than all the data I've gathered. Before hitting send, Eleanor looked at her granddaughter. Are you sure? I'm sure, Lila replied. Once we send this, the investigation begins. There's no turning back. Then send it, Eleanor said firmly. We have nothing left to lose but our fear. The soft click of the mouse sounded small, but it carried the weight of finality. Lila leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. Eleanor sat still, her eyes fixed on the window. The Savannah River shimmered under the moonlight, strangely peaceful. In that quiet moment, she realized something. The calm only comes when you face the storm. As they prepared to go to bed, the phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. Eleanor hesitated, then answered. A man's voice trembled on the other end. Mom, it's me. Her heart nearly stopped. Jason, why are you calling? Her voice was cold as steel. I need to talk. Someone's sabotaging my life. My accounts are frozen. I lost my job. Sabrina's panicking. You have to help me. You have to what? Eleanor interrupted. Save you from the consequences you created. You don't understand someone's hacking into my data, sending emails to the police accusing me of crimes. Really? She said with a dry laugh. Then maybe that's justice. And you, Jason, should pray that justice still has mercy. She hung up. In the dark, Lila whispered, Was it him? Yes. He's starting to be afraid. Lila smiled faintly. Good. Then we don't have to be afraid anymore. Eleanor nodded her gaze, unwavering. She knew the game had only just begun, and this time, the board belonged to them. The next morning, the sky over Savannah was heavy with gray rain. The sound of it drummed softly against the tin roof, each drop marking the rhythm of a somber melody. Eleanor sat by the window, a cup of cold tea in her hands, her gaze lost in the distance. The house was so quiet she could hear the wind slipping through the cracks, cold as the breath of the past. Upstairs, Lila worked without pause. The glow of the laptop lit her face, pale, focused, almost emotionless. Eleanor climbed the stairs and stopped at the doorway. Aren't you going to eat something? I'm not hungry. Lila replied, eyes fixed on the screen. Grandma Dad has taken another $300,000 from other victims. That woman, Sabrina, she's the one in charge. I've been tracking her accounts all night. Eleanor sat beside her, struggling to keep up with all the numbers. So what are you going to do now? I'm going to send all the evidence to the press. But first I have to make sure she doesn't have time to move the rest of the money. The press. Eleanor frowned. Are you sure that's the right move? If they find out you're the source, you could be in danger? I've stayed anonymous. No one can trace it back. I've also sent a copy of the data to the FBI. They'll know someone exposed them, but not who. Eleanor sighed. You're clever, Lila, but sometimes cleverness can be a double-edged sword. The world out there isn't as fair as the lines of code on your screen. Lila gave a faint smile. I know Grandma, but if we keep being afraid, people like them will always win. By noon, the rain had stopped. A dull light poured through the window, bathing the house in quiet gray. Eleanor was clearing the table ready to make Lila eat when there was a knock on the door. A man stood outside, raincoat dripping, holding an envelope. Mrs. Brooks. His voice was low and polite. I'm Agent Dean Holloway, Financial Crimes Division. We received your report and need to verify a few details. Eleanor froze. You got here quickly. Dean smiled slightly. The evidence submitted was thorough and impressively precise. We wanted to ask if you had any help. Whoever gathered the data seems very skilled. Lila appeared on the stairs, her eyes cautious. Eleanor replied calmly, No, I just gathered what my son left behind. I kept notes, that's all. Dean studied the two of them, his expression curious, but not suspicious. Thank you, ma'am. We'll open a formal investigation, but you need to understand if you receive any threats or suspicious contact, report it immediately. When the agent left, Lila closed the door and turned to her grandmother. You covered for me. I protected you, Eleanor said firmly. They don't need to know who really did it. I'm old enough to take responsibility. You still have a future. Lila was silent for a moment, then nodded. Then we moved forward together. Later that afternoon, Eleanor's phone rang. Jason's voice came through, frantic and panicked. Mom, they're investigating me. Sabrina's been called in for questioning. My accounts are frozen. My company wants to fire me. You have to help me, please. Eleanor gripped the phone tightly, her voice low but steady. Help you? How you took everything from me. What's left for me to give? You don't understand, I'm being framed. Sabrina says someone hacked the system and impersonated me. Hacked. Eleanor let out a dry laugh. Maybe the universe is just teaching you a lesson that not everything can be bought with money. Mom, he shouted. I'm going to lose everything you already have, Jason, she replied coldly. You've lost your family, your integrity, your soul. All that's left are the consequences. She hung up. Lila looked at her eyes filled with quiet sadness. Do you regret it? No, Eleanor said, tired but resolute. But it hurts. Being a mother means that sometimes justice tastes bitter. That night, neither of them slept. Lila kept monitoring the news while Eleanor sat writing her story, every word heavy as stone. She didn't want people to remember only the fraud. She wanted them to remember that in the midst of all that loss, someone still chose to stand tall. The next morning, Lila's phone buzzed. A new anonymous message appeared. You know, don't you? You messed with the wrong person. Sabrina doesn't lose that easily. Attached was a strange link. Lila's face went pale. They know, she whispered. Eleanor rushed over. Don't click that, I'm not that stupid, Lila said, forcing herself to stay calm. They're trying to scare me, but I'll hit back. She opened her security system, adding new firewalls, disabling trace routes. Grandma, if they come near us, I'll know. I've planted virtual trackers in every email address linked to Sabrina. If she sends anything, I'll trace her location. Eleanor's worry deepened. Lila, this isn't a game anymore. They could be more dangerous than you think. Grandma, they're the ones who broke the rules, she said quietly. I'm just restoring them. By evening, a breaking news alert flashed across the local broadcast. Federal authorities expand cryptocurrency fraud investigation. Primary suspects Sabrina Vale and Jason Brooks. The screen showed Jason being photographed leaving his office, face pale, eyes filled with panic. Eleanor's heart clenched. He's been arrested. Not yet, Lila answered slowly, but he's under surveillance. They're taking his statement. Eleanor looked out the window. The rain had cleared and the clouds were drifting east. The sunset spread across the river like molten gold. She exhaled, her voice soft as the breeze. Maybe justice is finally coming. So why don't I feel happy? Lila leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder. Because justice can feel like loss too, Grandma. It only brings peace once everything has already been broken. The house fell silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't fear. It was waiting. Eleanor knew the storm wasn't over. When someone like Sabrina is cornered, the most terrifying thing isn't her defeat, but her revenge. And that night, as the moonlight shimmered on the Savannah River, Eleanor could feel it in her bones. The next storm was already on its way. That night, the wind from the Savannah River cut through the air with a biting chill. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat in the dim living room, the lamp casting a faint, golden glow. On the table lay stacks of printed evidence, a few cold cups of coffee, and an old family photograph. She stared for a long time at Jason's face in the picture, then turned away as if she could no longer bear the weight of her own memories. Upstairs, the light from Lila's room spilled faintly down the hallway. Eleanor could hear the soft tapping of keys and the steady rhythm of her granddaughter's breathing. After a while, Lila emerged, her hair tousled, eyes shadowed by exhaustion, but her face lit with fierce determination. "Grandma, I found where they're hiding." Eleanor looked up. "Tell me," Miami Lila said. "I traced Sabrina's emails. She booked domestic flight tickets and made a payment for a temporary apartment by the coast. They plan to leave within 2 days before the investigation order is officially signed. Are you sure I'm sure? I even saw their messages to each other. If it all goes public, we still have Plan B. That plan is to run." Eleanor drew a deep breath, her hand tightening around her teacup. "We have to do something. If they escape, all the evidence will mean nothing." Lila nodded. "I already sent this information to Agent Dean Holloway. But Grandma, I didn't just send their location. I also sent data about 17 other people they scammed. I want the police to see this isn't just a family issue. It's a real crime." Eleanor fell silent. Her eyes shimmered a mix of pride and sorrow. "You did the right thing, Lila. If my son is arrested, it's because of his choices, not yours." The girl pressed her lips together, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to hurt him, Grandma. But he's not my father anymore." Eleanor placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes you have to accept that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." The next morning, as Eleanor was making tea, the phone rang. The caller ID was unknown. She hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. A woman's voice came through, smooth and cold. "Mrs. Brooks, isn't it? Yes. Who is this?" "This is Sabrina Vale. I believe you've heard my name enough times by now." Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. "Why are you calling me to warn you?" Sabrina said coolly. "You're getting involved in something you don't understand. Your granddaughter may be clever, but the world is far crueler than your moral lessons. If you don't want her to get hurt, stop now." Her voice was sweet but sharp as glass. Eleanor steadied herself. "You've stolen everything from me, from my family. Do you really think I'll stay silent, stolen?" Sabrina laughed softly, the sound like ice cracking. "I only offered opportunity. It was your son who brought me the money. I didn't force anyone." Eleanor's knuckles turned white as she gripped the phone. "If you call this number again, I'll go straight to the police." "Oh, you could do far more than that," Sabrina said slowly. "But remember, no one stays a victim forever, and no one stays a winner forever either. Don't let that sweet granddaughter of yours pay the price for a war you can't win." Then the line went dead. Eleanor sat motionless, fury and fear twisting in her chest. She knew that wasn't an empty threat. Lila came downstairs and saw her grandmother pale as paper. "Who was it, Sabrina?" The girl's hands clenched. I'll make her regret it." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Don't take any risks. Let the police handle this." But that night, long after Eleanor had gone to bed, Lila was still awake. She opened her laptop and began tracing the signal from Sabrina's call. Lines of code flashed across the screen, then a map appeared. The red dot blinked over Miami, just as she had guessed. "You won't get away," she whispered. 2 days later, the morning news broke. Investigators have located the hideout of Sabrina Vale and Jason Brooks. Both suspects are now wanted. Eleanor's heart raced as she watched the footage. The screen showed blurred images of police surrounding an apartment complex, sirens wailing in the distance. "Lila, come look," she called out. Lila ran over and stared at the screen. "They found them," she said quietly, "and Dad." The reporter continued. A man accompanying Sabrina Vale was apprehended while attempting to flee through the backyard. The suspect has been identified as Jason Brooks. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, her breath catching. "He's been arrested." She sank into a chair, tears welling in her eyes, unsure if they were from relief or heartbreak. "It's over." But Lila didn't cry. Her gaze stayed fixed on the television, calm and cold. "No, Grandma. This is only the beginning. Now we have to make sure everyone else gets justice, too." That afternoon, Eleanor received a call from Agent Dean. "Mrs. Brooks, we've detained both suspects. Sabrina is in custody and Jason will be transferred to the Georgia State Detention Center. The evidence from you and your source helped us crack this case." "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice trembling, "but I don't know whether to feel happy or to cry." "Maybe both," Dean replied. "But you should be proud, ma'am. Not many people have the courage to stand up after being betrayed by their own family." That evening, as the house grew quiet, Eleanor sat at her writing desk. She opened her journal and wrote her first entry in months. Today, justice knocked on the door. But what I heard wasn't joy. It was the sound of something breaking. "My son is in handcuffs. My granddaughter has lost her childhood, and I, a mother and grandmother, must learn how to live between those two truths." Upstairs, Lila closed her laptop and gazed out the window where the river wind still whispered. Inside her chest wasn't triumph, but a hollow ache. Justice had come, but it had taken something they could never get back, a son, a father. As the night deepened, Eleanor climbed the stairs and gently placed her hand on Lila's shoulder. Her voice was soft, almost a breath. "You know, Lila, even when everything's broken, we still have each other. And as long as we have each other, we can begin again." Outside, the rain had stopped. The Savannah River reflected the silver light of the moon, its surface calm and still, as if at last the storms inside them were finally beginning to fade. 3 days later, the sky over Savannah was unusually clear. White clouds drifted lazily across the pale blue, and the morning sunlight poured through the kitchen window where Eleanor was making tea. The scent of jasmine leaves filled the air soft and delicate, yet inside her lingered an emptiness that no fragrance could soothe. The news kept replaying the same clip, Sabrina Vale, her hands cuffed, face expressionless, stepping out of the police station surrounded by flashing cameras. Jason followed behind, had bowed his shirt wrinkled and untucked. 2 suspects in a $400,000 financial fraud case have been arrested and are awaiting trial. The newscaster's voice was calm, almost mechanical. Eleanor watched in silence, her heart heavy. Lila sat at the table eating breakfast quickly, her laptop still open beside her lines of documents scrolling across the screen. She didn't look up. "Grandma, they've only caught 2 people. There are still so many victims who haven't gotten their money back." Eleanor set her teacup down. "You can't save everyone, Lila. Sometimes saving yourself is already more than enough." Lila shook her head slightly. "No, Grandma. That's exactly what Dad never understood. He only thought about himself, and that's why he lost everything. If I stopped now, then I'd be no different from him." Eleanor said nothing. She felt both worried and proud. This child of hers was walking a path Eleanor had once wished someone would take, the path of those who refused to be dismissed. By noon, the phone rang. She recognized the calm voice of Agent Dean Holloway. "Mrs. Brooks, I have good news. Sabrina has started to talk. She's confessed to the entire operation and confirmed that Jason was her accomplice. We're also investigating additional fraudulent investments. Thanks to the data sent from your anonymous source, we've identified at least 7 more victims." "My goodness," Eleanor whispered. "Thank you. Finally, the truth is out." Dean added, "We're beginning restitution procedures. You may recover a portion of your funds depending on the court's decision." When the call ended, Eleanor told Lila everything. But instead of smiling, the girl only nodded. "You see, Grandma," they said, "a portion. Some people will still lose everything. I can't stand that thought. What are you planning to do? Help them get it back? I found the list of every victim. I'll contact each one and send them the evidence. If they join together and file a class action, they'll have a better chance of winning." Eleanor's chest tightened. "Aren't you afraid you're only 14? Those people are adults, lawyers, bankers." Grandma Lila said, her voice calm but unwavering truth doesn't need age to be believed. It only needs someone brave enough to speak it. That afternoon, Eleanor accompanied her to the public library, the place Lila chose to send her first emails. In the quiet corner, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long beams across the wooden table. Lila opened her laptop and began typing quickly. "I'm writing to a woman named Mrs. Harper, 76 years old. She lost nearly all her savings because she trusted Sabrina. I want her to know not everyone stays silent." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her granddaughter's shoulder and nodded. "Do it, but remember, we fight for justice, not revenge." When the screen flashed, email sent successfully, Lila leaned back in her chair, exhaling softly. 1 down, 16 to go. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I don't know where you find all that strength." "From you," Lila said without looking up. "You taught me that kindness isn't weakness. Now it's my turn to prove it." The next day, an email arrived not from the police, but from Mrs. Harper herself. "Thank you, anonymous sender. Because of you, I went to the police and discovered that my account can be restored. I don't know who you are, but I wish you all the good in the world." Eleanor read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You did it, Lila." But the girl didn't smile. "It's only one person, Grandma. There are still so many who don't even know they've been deceived." That evening, Eleanor walked down to the riverbank. The sunset painted the water in shades of red and gold, the ripples glimmering under the dying light. She sat on the old wooden bench where she used to read stories to Lila as a child. Memories filled her heart, her gentle husband, her wayward son, her brave granddaughter. Life was strange, she thought. When she was young, she taught others about integrity. Now in her old age, she was learning that same lesson from her grandchild. Later that night, Lila came running down the stairs holding a printed sheet. "Grandma, you have to see this." Eleanor took it from her. It was the latest news update. The Financial Crimes Bureau has launched a recovery campaign for victims of the Sabrina Vale case. The first recipient, Mrs. Margaret Harper, will receive a reimbursement of over $30,000. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, her eyes glistening. "They really listened to you." Lila smiled this time genuinely. "They didn't listen to me, Grandma. They listened to the truth." That night, the two sat by the window, the river breeze, gentle frogs calling in the distance. Eleanor whispered, "You know, sometimes justice doesn't come with handcuffs. It comes when someone's tears are finally wiped away." Lila rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder. And sometimes justice looks like two women who refuse to give up. The house was peaceful once more. For the first time in months, Eleanor slept deeply. Outside, the Savannah River flowed quietly, carrying away the wreckage of the past. Yet somewhere in its current, a faint light shimmered the light of a new beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Jason and Sabrina were arrested. The city of Savannah had returned to its calm rhythm, but the house by the river where Eleanor lived was no longer the quiet haven it once was. Every day brought letters, phone calls, and emails, people reaching out to thank her, to ask for advice, to seek help. Her and Lila's names appeared in newspapers and online headlines. 2 generations of women stand up against financial crime. Eleanor never imagined she would become the subject of public attention. When reporters came knocking, she only smiled and said, "I'm just a mother protecting her family." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. This battle had changed everything, especially Lila. The girl was no longer the shy child who once sat by the window doing homework. Now she woke early each morning to read the news track, new fraud cases, and reply to the many messages that filled her inbox. She had even created a small website called Safe Hands to teach older people how to protect themselves financially. One afternoon, as Eleanor was watering the garden, Lila came outside with a serious expression. "Grandma, the FBI sent an email to thank us. They said without my data, the Sabrina Vale case would have taken months longer to solve." Eleanor smiled, her voice a mix of pride and concern. "You're brilliant, but remember you're still only 14. Don't let them pull you in too deep. I just want to learn." Lila replied softly but firmly, "You once told me that knowledge is the only thing that keeps us standing when facing the powerful." Eleanor nodded, but that night, as she watched her granddaughter working under the pale glow of the laptop screen, her heart ached. She feared this child was carrying too much too soon. The next day, a thick envelope arrived from the Department of Justice. Inside was an official notice of asset restoration. Part of Eleanor's retirement fund had been returned, $18,400. Lila jumped up with joy, her eyes shining. "See, Grandma." They kept their word. Eleanor held the paper tightly, too moved to speak. "It's enough to fix the roof," she whispered. They embraced, long and silent. But that same evening, another storm found its way in. As Eleanor was turning off the lights, Lila shouted from upstairs, "Grandma, something's wrong." Eleanor hurried up. On the laptop screen was a new email. "We're not done yet, clever girl. Your data isn't as safe as you think." There was no signature, but the sender's address carried a name that froze Eleanor's blood. S. Vale. "That's impossible," she murmured. "She's in prison." Lila typed, rapidly tracing the source. It came from a server inside a federal facility, but someone else could have sent it for her. Sabrina still has people on the outside. Eleanor sank into a chair. "Dear God, what does she want now? She's trying to scare me or test whether I still have the files," Lila said, her tone steady. "But I won't let her win." "No," Eleanor's voice rose, trembling with fear. "You're done with this. You've done more than enough. Let the authorities handle it." "You don't understand," Lila replied quietly but firmly. "She's testing to see if we're afraid. If we back down, she'll just keep going. You're too young for this dangerous game." Eleanor cried, her voice cracking between anger and terror. "I've already lost a son. I won't lose my granddaughter, too." The room fell silent. Rain began to fall outside, the wind howling through the eaves. Lila lowered her head. "I'm sorry. But if you want peace, I have to make her stop." Before Eleanor could react, Lila turned back to the computer. Lines of code streamed across the screen like rushing water. Eleanor watched, no longer able to intervene. In the dim light, the small, determined figure of her granddaughter looked like a reflection of her younger self, a woman who once dared to rise in the face of despair. 2 days later, the news broke Sabrina Vale transferred to another facility amid allegations of unauthorized communication. Internal investigation underway. Eleanor read the headlines silently. She knew Lila had something to do with it, but she didn't ask. Some secrets she thought are best kept, especially when they protect the ones you love. Another afternoon, they received a parcel from the legal office, an envelope containing the list of victims to be compensated. At the top was the name Mrs. Margaret Harper. Lila scanned the long list, her lips moving as she read each name: Francis Miller, Richard Hayes, John Patterson. Then she stopped. They're all getting help. Eleanor smiled gently. Because of you, Lila. Because one brave girl did what grown men wouldn't. Not just me, Lila whispered. Because you never gave up. That evening they walked together along the riverbank. The air was clear, the city lights dancing on the water. You know, Grandma, Lila said softly when I read their thank you letters, I thought if Dad could see this, maybe he would have chosen differently. Eleanor answered quietly, maybe, but people only change when they face what they've done. Your father never did. The girl was silent for a while, then said, I don't hate him anymore. Eleanor turned to her, surprised. I just feel sorry for him. Lila continued, if he could see what we've done, he'd know the most valuable thing in life isn't money, it's honor. Eleanor placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. You're right, honor and trust. They stopped on the bridge, the wind carrying the scent of salt and water. Beneath them, the river moved slowly, quietly, as if taking away the remnants of old wounds. Eleanor smiled for the first time in months. You know, Lila, she said softly the day your father left, I thought everything was over. But today, looking at you, I realize sometimes when one generation fades, another begins to shine. Lila took her grandmother's hand, her small fingers tightening around the wrinkled but warm ones. Grandma, I don't just want to be good with technology. I want to protect people like you, those who trusted the wrong person who were used, but still have goodness left in them. I want them to know someone is on their side. Eleanor looked at her eyes filled with pride. You will, Lila. I know you will. In the distance, church bells rang and the wind rustled gently through the trees. On the bridge, 2 figures, one old, one young, stood still under the golden hue of dusk, needing no more words. They both knew their fight wasn't over, but for the first time, neither of them was afraid, because they understood now that justice doesn't only come from the courts. Sometimes it begins in a small house by the river, where a grandmother teaches her granddaughter that when someone steals your trust, you use your mind to take it back. And if you are brave enough to stand tall, no one will ever make you bow again. One spring morning, the air in Savannah carried the scent of salt and damp grass. After weeks of chaos, the house by the river where Eleanor lived had finally returned to peace, or at least it seemed that way on the surface. Inside, the lives of grandmother and granddaughter had changed forever. Lila was back to her regular studies, but every evening she still worked with a small group of people she had met online, cybersecurity experts, lawyers, and a few victims of Sabrina Vale. From an ordinary schoolgirl, she had become someone adults turned to for advice. Eleanor watched her with a mix of pride and worry. One afternoon, while Eleanor was hanging laundry, Lila came outside holding a printed letter. Grandma, I just got an email from the Financial Crimes Bureau. They want me to attend the Cyber Justice for Youth conference next month in Washington, D.C. Eleanor's eyes widened. Good heavens, they invited you. Lila nodded, her face glowing with excitement but tinged with hesitation. I don't know if I should go. I still have school and the plane ticket, the hotel. I don't want to trouble you. Eleanor set the basket down and looked straight at her. Listen to me, Lila. Opportunities like this don't knock twice. If they invited you, it means they see something special in you. You must go. I'll take care of the rest. The girl pressed her lips together, then smiled. You talk like I'm about to become a superhero. To me, you already are, Eleanor said warmly. That day, they sat together making plans. Lila would travel to Washington accompanied by Agent Dean Holloway, the investigator, who had handled the Sabrina Vale case. Dean had agreed to act as her temporary guardian for the trip. He wanted Lila to share her story from a young person's perspective and explain how she used technology to fight crime. Eleanor felt both happy and uneasy. She knew Lila was stepping into a bigger world, one that was wider, more dangerous, and one where Eleanor couldn't always be beside her. That night, as they sat down for dinner, the television suddenly broke the quiet with breaking news. The trial of Sabrina Vale and Jason Brooks is set for next week. The two defendants face charges of fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Eleanor set her spoon down, her heart sinking under the weight of memory. He's going to court. Lila looked at her. Do you want to go? Eleanor hesitated. I don't know. Part of me wants to see him to know I've truly let go. Part of me is afraid. You should go, Lila said softly, not to blame him, but to close the chapter. A week later, they arrived at the federal courthouse in Savannah. The hallway was crowded with reporters. When Jason was led out, flashes from cameras lit the air like lightning. He looked thinner, his hair messy dark circles under his eyes. When his gaze met Eleanor's by accident, time seemed to stop. He lowered his head, his lips trembling, but said nothing. Sabrina, on the other hand, still radiated arrogance. She wore a white suit, her face flawlessly made up as if she still controlled the game. When the prosecutor read the charges, Sabrina merely smiled. But that smile vanished the moment the prosecution began displaying the evidence Lila had gathered: each email, each transaction record, each trace of digital code. Dean stood beside Eleanor and whispered, Your granddaughter just helped establish the first legal precedent in Georgia for individual scale digital fraud. No one has ever done that before. The trial lasted nearly 4 hours. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. We find the defendant, Sabrina Vale, guilty. Jason Brooks, accomplice, guilty. The judge's voice echoed through the hall. Eleanor felt her legs weaken as tears rolled down her cheeks. When Jason turned to look at her, there was something different in his eyes. No more defiance, only exhaustion and regret. After the session ended, Eleanor waited in the hallway. Jason was being escorted away, but before turning the corner, he murmured, Mom, I'm sorry. His voice broke. Eleanor didn't reply. She simply nodded, her eyes glistening. That was all that needed to be said. On the way home, Lila was silent. When the car stopped at their gate, she finally asked Grandma, Do you feel lighter now? Yes, but also empty, Eleanor replied. Forgiving isn't hard, but accepting the loss of a child never gets easier. He'll pay for what he's done. Lila said, But at least now you still have me, and I still have you. That night they sat together on the porch, watching the moonlight ripple across the Savannah River. The breeze carried the scent of salt and fresh grass, and in the distance crickets sang softly. Eleanor turned to her granddaughter, her tired smile full of warmth. You know, Lila, my life used to be contained within these 4 walls. But because of you, I've seen a bigger world and learned that true strength doesn't come from age, but from faith. That faith came from you, Lila said, her voice trembling. Without you, I wouldn't have dared to do anything. The next morning, Dean arrived to take Lila to Washington. Eleanor stood on the porch watching as the car disappeared down the sunny road. Her heart felt both empty and full, as if a piece of her soul had gone forth to start a new journey. 3 days later, while watering her garden, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Dean, Mrs. Brooks. "I just wanted to share some good news." Lila finished her speech at the conference. The entire room gave her a standing ovation. She spoke about how justice doesn't just come from the courts, but from the courage within every person. Eleanor laughed through her tears. "I'm not surprised," she said softly. "That girl was born to remind people that there's still good left in this world." That evening, as the sun faded, she opened the window and looked out at the river. The golden light of dusk spread over the water, each small wave, whispering that every pain eventually softens. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and in her mind she heard her late husband's gentle voice. "You've done well, Eleanor." For the first time, she didn't feel alone. Somewhere out there, a 14-year-old girl was continuing the mission she had begun, protecting the vulnerable, speaking up for justice. And for Eleanor, that was enough. Before going to bed, she opened her journal and wrote Day 100 since it all began. "My son has fallen, but my granddaughter is soaring. I lost a child, but I gained faith in the next generation. Perhaps this is how God restores balance, not with wealth, but with light in places we least expect." Outside the window, the Savannah River mirrored the round, glowing moon. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor smiled. And that night, she dreamed of Lila standing on a grand stage under bright lights, her voice strong and clear, as she declared, "No one is ever too small to make justice happen." One early summer morning, sunlight shimmered across the Savannah River, scattering golden reflections that danced like liquid gold. Eleanor woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, filled only with birdsong and the soft whisper of wind through the open window. It had been 3 weeks since Lila left Savannah for Washington, yet every corner of the home still carried traces of her presence: a glass with a faint mark of lipstick, a stack of handwritten notes neatly placed by the window, and a framed photograph of the two of them taken on the day the verdict was read. Eleanor poured herself a cup of tea and sipped slowly. Life, she thought, was strange. Sometimes you must lose everything to understand that the most valuable thing is faith in others. She had lost her son, but regained her faith and herself. The ring of the phone broke her thoughts. It was an unfamiliar number. She answered, and a deep male voice spoke. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Dean Holloway." Lila just finished her keynote speech at headquarters. The whole conference quoted her words. "You don't have to be big to make change. You just have to be brave enough to stand up." The media has started calling her the young justice hacker. Eleanor smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Dean. She deserves it." "She does," he agreed. "And I wanted you to know the Department of Justice is offering her a special scholarship. Lila will be able to attend any technology university of her choice when she's of age, fully funded." When the call ended, Eleanor sat quietly. She thought back to that stormy night when her granddaughter, armed with nothing but a keyboard and her own brilliance, had taken down a criminal network. From somewhere deep inside, Eleanor realized justice was never just the work of a courtroom. It was the story of ordinary people who acted when no one else dared. That afternoon, while trimming roses by the porch, a mail carrier appeared with a brown envelope stamped Federal Correctional Facility. Eleanor froze. "Jason." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was short, written in the shaky but familiar handwriting she knew by heart. "Mom, I don't ask for forgiveness, but I hope you'll read this to the end. Every night in prison, I think about what I did. I miss the house by the river, the smell of your tea, the sound of Lila's laughter. I once believed money was the only way to be strong, but I realize now that I was weakest when I lost your trust. Sabrina was sentenced to 10 years. I got 5, but every day here feels like a lifetime. If possible, when I get out, I'd like to see you once more, not to apologize, but just to know you're all right. Your son, Jason. Eleanor didn't cry. She sat on the wooden chair looking out at the river. The water flowed gently slow as the weary breath of time. Inside her, the anger had long dissolved, leaving only a patient sorrow. She knew some wounds don't need forgiveness to heal, they only need to stop bleeding. That night, she wrote a few lines in her journal. My son has learned remorse. That is a beginning. I will not close the door, but I will not open it too wide either. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is accepting that the past has finished its work. 3 days later, Dean called again. Mrs. Brooks, you might want to know Sabrina just offered a deal for sentence reduction in exchange for helping us investigate other fraud networks. She's naming international associates. Eleanor frowned. She's still scheming. Maybe, but because of it, many more victims will be saved. And Jason, he's agreed to testify to verify the transactions. He's trying to make amends. Maybe one day, Eleanor said softly, he'll truly become the son I once believed in. When the call ended, she sat for a long time, reflecting on the strange symmetry of fate. A fallen son, a granddaughter who rose, and the guilty now helping expose greater evil. Sometimes life was fair in its own way. No one entirely wicked, no one entirely pure. On Saturday night, Lila called from Washington. The video call flickered to life, showing her radiant face, the bright auditorium lights behind her. Grandma, I did it. I met so many incredible people, even victims who once read about our story. They said I gave them the strength to keep going. Eleanor smiled, her voice warm. You're only 14, but you've done what most never dare to in a lifetime. I'm so proud of you. Grandma Lila said I'm about to receive an honorary certificate, and they invited me to speak at the closing ceremony. What will you say? Eleanor asked. Lila smiled softly. I'll talk about you. About a woman who lost everything but never let pain make her bitter. Eleanor's heart trembled. You don't have to do that. I have to, Lila whispered, because you're proof that kindness is never weakness. When the call ended, the light in Eleanor's eyes stayed. She knew Lila's tomorrow would be bigger, farther, and that she herself would be left watching from the shore. But for a mother, a grandmother, that was the greatest joy of all. 2 weeks later, Lila came home. She stepped out of Dean's car, her hair longer, her posture poised with new confidence. Eleanor embraced her, tightly breathing deeply as if to make sure this child was still real, still here. Grandma, I brought you something. What is it? Lila handed her a neatly bound folder. On the cover, bold letters read, Proposal Family Financial Protection Foundation. Eleanor opened it and read carefully, her eyes widening. A foundation to protect families from financial fraud. You're founding an organization. Yes. Lila said, her eyes shining. I want to build a place where victims of scams can report, learn how to protect themselves, and get legal help. Dean agreed to be an advisor. I just need you to be co-founder. Eleanor laughed through tears. Oh, Lila, you're still in school. I'll study and build it at the same time, Lila said quickly. I already got a small grant from the Department of Justice. If it goes well, they'll expand it nationwide. Grandma, we can help so many people. Eleanor gently cupped her granddaughter's face. I never thought God would send me a child like you. You make me believe the world can still heal itself. A month later, a small sign hung outside the river house. Family Financial Protection Foundation founders, Eleanor and Lila Brooks. The townspeople gathered for the opening along with reporters and several former victims. The once tired faces of those who had suffered now glowed with hope as Lila spoke. I was just a girl who lost her savings to a scam. But because of my grandmother, I learned that justice doesn't only belong to the courts, it belongs to anyone brave enough to stand up. Applause thundered and echoed. Eleanor stood quietly in the back, her heartbeat steady, not from age but from pride. After the ceremony, Dean shook her hand. "Mrs. Brooks, I once thought this was just a case. Now I see it's a movement. Thank you for teaching us that courage has no age." Eleanor smiled softly. "No agent. I only taught my granddaughter. The rest she taught the world." That evening, after everyone left, the two of them sat together on the porch. The sunset painted the river red and gold. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine mixed with salt and memory. Grandma Lila said gently, "I think I'll write a letter to Dad." Eleanor turned to her, not surprised. "What will you say? I'm not sure. Maybe I'll tell him about today, about how you smiled about the foundation, about all the people we've helped. He might not believe it, but at least he'll know we're doing well." Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening. "Write it, my girl. Forgiveness is the only way we can move forward without carrying the weight behind us." Lila looked toward the horizon and said softly, "I'm not writing to forgive. I'm writing to remind him there's still a chance. Late, but still a chance." Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling. "You sound just like I did when I was young. Maybe that's why we understand each other so well." Above them, the colors of dusk faded into deep violet. The Savannah River flowed quietly, the silent witness of everything they had endured. Eleanor closed her eyes, her heart at peace. At last everything had come full circle, not with resentment, but with compassion. And she knew that starting tomorrow, this little house by the river would no longer be a refuge for sorrow, but the birthplace of kindness. As twilight settled, Lila looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for believing in me." Eleanor smiled and replied softly, "No, my dear. Thank you for helping me believe in humanity again." And there in the gentle light of the Savannah sunset, two generations, one old, one young, sat side by side, peaceful as if the world itself had been mended after a storm. Justice had come, but what remained was not victory. It was the quiet rebirth of faith. A year had passed since the trial ended, and autumn returned once more to the city of Savannah. In the early morning mist blanketed the river, the small boats anchored along the banks, resting silently as if asleep. Inside the wooden house by the water, Eleanor Brooks prepared her tea, slowly, every motion careful and deliberate, as though she feared disturbing the fragile peace that had finally settled after so many storms. Everything seemed calm now, yet the change within that house was more profound than ever. Lila was 15. She had grown taller, her gaze sharper, and her voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had looked into the eye of chaos and did not flinch. The old house had become the modest office of the Family Financial Protection Foundation, the fund the grandmother and granddaughter had built from their own pain. On the walls hung thank you letters, photos of victims who had reclaimed their savings and certificates from the Department of Justice. Out on the porch, the wooden sign carved by hand still swayed in the wind, protecting families from financial fraud. That morning, Lila was responding to an email from an elderly woman in Texas who had just lost her life savings. She explained how to contact a lawyer, attach complaint forms, and ended the message with one final line, "Don't lose faith. Justice still exists as long as we keep searching for it." Standing behind her, Eleanor watched with quiet warmth. She still remembered that night when 13-year-old Lila sat in the dark, her face lit by the glow of a laptop screen. determination burning in her young eyes. Back then, Eleanor never imagined that her granddaughter's courage would ignite a movement to protect the vulnerable. One afternoon in early October, Eleanor was trimming flowers in the garden when the mailman arrived with an envelope stamped with the seal of the federal prison. One glance at the handwriting, and she knew who it was from. Jason. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, the scent of old paper and ink tightening her chest. Mom, I know you've heard too many apologies, so I won't write to ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know that in prison, I've been working in the library. Every day sorting books, I think about our home, about the nights you used to read to me and about little Lila sitting beside us. I'm studying again, learning about justice, about consequences, and about trust. I've helped the prison staff create a small program to teach inmates how to avoid financial scams. They call me the fraud-fighting lunatic. I laugh because at least now I know I'm doing something right. Mom, when I'm released, if you and Lila allow, I'd like to work for the foundation, not to erase my guilt, but to rebuild trust. I don't ask to be forgotten, only to begin again. The letter ended abruptly without a closing line, as if Jason feared that one more word might break him. Eleanor finished reading without tears. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer beside her old keepsakes. Tears were no longer necessary. She had shed enough. What remained now was a quiet serenity, like the river outside flowing gently after a season of storms. The next day, Lila returned from her shift at the community center with a new stack of papers in hand. "Grandma, I have news," she said excitedly. "The government's going to fund our foundation. They want to turn it into a statewide model." Eleanor smiled softly and squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "I never thought what we started would reach this far. But Lila, remember, money is not the goal. The only thing worth keeping is your heart." "I know," Lila whispered. "I'm doing this for people like you." That evening, as the river breeze rustled the curtains, Eleanor took out Jason's letter and read it again. The lamp cast a soft glow over her lined face, her eyes still clear and alive. She remembered Jason's words in court. "Mom, I was wrong." Back then, she hadn't believed him. Now, holding his letter, she finally understood that true remorse needs no speech. 2 months later, on a damp morning, the telephone rang. The voice of a prison officer came through Mrs. Brooks. "This is to inform you that inmate Jason Brooks will be released early for good behavior. His release is scheduled for early June." Eleanor held the receiver in silence. When she hung up, she sat still, her heart filled with a swirl of emotions: fear, pity, hope. That evening, she told Lila. The girl was quiet for a long time before asking, "Do you want to see him again?" Perhaps Eleanor said after a pause, "I need to see whether the man who walks out of that prison is still the Jason I once knew." "I want to see him too," Lila added softly, not to accuse him, but to listen. "I need to know if he truly understands what happened." June arrived with light rain. On the day of Jason's release, the sky was gray mist hanging low over the river. Eleanor and Lila stood outside the prison gates, the wind tugging at their hair. When the metal doors opened, Jason stepped out, thin-tanned, but with a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He froze when he saw them, then lowered his head. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor walked forward and embraced her son. "Welcome home," she said. Jason's voice trembled. "I didn't think you'd still be waiting." "I wasn't waiting," she replied gently, "but I never gave up." Lila approached her gaze, calm. "Dad." Jason swallowed hard. "You've grown so much. Do you hate me?" "No," she said quietly. "I just don't want you to forget. We can start over, but only if you stay honest." They returned to Savannah together. Jason stayed in his old room where the family photos still hung on the walls. That night he stood on the porch, staring out at the river, silent as though speaking to his past. Watching from the window, Eleanor saw the light reflecting on his weary face and realized that prison hadn't punished him as much as his own guilt had. In the days that followed, Jason began working at the foundation. At first, people were wary. Some whispered, "A criminal teaching others how to avoid fraud, what a joke." But during the first community meeting, Lila stood up and said clearly, "Because my father once did wrong, he understands how criminals think. And that's exactly why he can help us protect more people." The room fell silent. Jason bowed his head, his eyes wet. Over time, he proved himself through his work. He trained the technical team to detect suspicious transaction patterns, wrote a guide titled How to Recognize Online Scams, and led workshops at local schools. After one talk, a student asked, "Were you really a criminal?" Jason smiled softly. "Yes, but I refuse to let that define the rest of my life." Watching him, Eleanor felt her heart settle. The deepest wounds were healing quietly, one good deed at a time. One evening, she found Jason on the porch, brewing jasmine tea, its fragrance warm and gentle. He poured her a cup and said, "I never thought I'd have the chance to do this with you again." "Because you chose the right path," she replied firmly but kindly. "Justice isn't just about paying for what you've done, it's about how you live after the debt is paid." That year, their foundation was honored in the Community Heroes of Georgia program. Lila went on stage to accept the award. When asked what inspired her to begin, she said, "A woman taught me that kindness is stronger than loss, and a man taught me that even those who have fallen can still make the world better." The audience rose to their feet, applauding. Eleanor and Jason sat in the front row, their eyes shining with pride. That night, when they returned home, the house by the river glowed with light. On the table was a bouquet from the neighbors and a card that read, "Thank you, the Brooks family, for reminding us to believe in goodness." Eleanor opened the window, letting in the cool river breeze. Lila and Jason sat side by side at the desk, she typing swiftly, he sorting through papers. The sight was so peaceful that Eleanor paused, imprinting it in her memory. "You know," she said softly, "life is like that river out there. There are calm stretches and rough ones, moments when the water runs clear, and others when it's muddy. But as long as it keeps flowing, there's still a chance." Lila looked up smiling. "Grandma, that river is you. You never stopped even through the storms." Jason nodded, voice trembling. "And because of you, I found my way back." They sat quietly listening to the gentle rhythm of the water beneath the wooden pier. Outside, the moon shone on the river, its silver light glinting off the carved wooden sign that read, "Family Financial Protection Foundation." Eleanor inhaled the faint scent of jasmine tea, closed her eyes, and felt a deep sense of completion. If someone were to ask her whether justice truly exists, she would smile and answer calmly, "Yes." But real justice isn't only found in courtrooms. It lives in the way we forgive, in our courage to love those who once hurt us, and in the faith that people can still change. Beyond the windows, the river wind blew softly yellow leaves drifting across the water. 3 generations sat together in the small wooden house, no one speaking. They simply shared the warmth of family, listening to the gentle flow of the Savannah River. A quiet song closing one chapter of life, where pain had turned into faith, and that faith would keep flowing with the river, never fading away.